And that's where it got to the next level for me of this isn't just about singing and playing guitar in front of people. Like this is about pastoring people. There's so much more to this, and there's so much importance to this than I knew or than I had ever realized.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Evan DiDio Show. I'm here with Glory O today. She has worked with Bethel, and now she's in New York. She moves around in leading worship and now has a YouTube channel of her own where she's teaching people what worship is, the importance of a mentor, and we're going to be diving into all of that today. So please welcome Glory O. Glory O, it's great to have you with us today.
Hey, it's great to be on your show, Evan. And I actually didn't know that was how you say your name. So that's pretty cool.
Oh, yeah. For my first question, tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of where you've been, especially during the pandemic, and how much it has affected you.
Yeah. So just as you mentioned, I have been at Bethel the last 5 years. I was living out in Redding, California. I moved out there in 2015 and did a school of ministry, and worship was a part of my life way before that. And that, we'll get into that of why that's a part of my YouTube channel, Your Worship Mentor. But yeah, I moved back in January. I moved back to New York. I don't know if we mentioned that, but moved back to New York in January of this year. And the pandemic has been crazy. And I think everybody knows New York has been one of the hardest hit places. But I'm, really proud to say that New York is back on the mend. And even though there might still be a little bit of a stigma with New York, like we're doing really well. All things considered, and there's been a lot of loss, like people that I've known personally and stuff. So it's definitely a difficult time for the city, for a lot of families, for me personally, for people that I know personally. It's been a difficult time, but it's just been really good to see like my church that I go to, just, staying connected and helping people out, and just people kind of banding together and staying strong together. So the pandemic has been kind of crazy. That's one side of it. The flip side of it has been, working on my YouTube channel when I can, and just giving out gems and giving out, what I've learned and, what I've gleaned in worship and in worship leading and its importance, and just giving that out because I know tons of people are watching YouTube right now, as I'm sure you know with your channel.
Oh, yeah. So for all of my community, as a community, we need to make sure we're standing in prayer with each other. So especially with Miss Glory here, keep her in her prayers. Remember her when you're praying, because there's still a lot of stuff going on up there, and as she mentioned, in her personal life too. So just keep her in her prayers. Pray for wisdom. Although a lot of times we pray for wisdom and we don't like it when we get it, it's still a good thing. Come on, somebody put some amen in the comments below. But my first kind of question is, how did you get started in leading worship? How did you get into it? And then we'll go from there.
So I said this to you, Evan, earlier when we met, that I look probably about the same age as you, but I'm a little bit older. And I've been leading worship since I started leading when I was in college. I grew up in church, an Assemblies of God church. Grew up in church and was just always singing and always a part of children's choirs and all of that fun stuff. And then in high school, I started to learn how to play guitar. So that was kind of a turning point for me with music and musicianship. Started to learn how to play guitar. And then when I got to college, I was in InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, which is a kind of international Christian fellowship that's at like the university level. And I was a part of that, and I started with the praise team when I was in my freshman year and was playing bass. And, I was one of those church kids, so it's like, you have this one instrument, but you play everything, so that was,
you never
that
know
was
where
me.
you're going to be on a Sunday morning.
Right. So I played bass in the band, and then, started leading. I think it was in my sophomore or junior year, because there actually was a gap. So this is something that I talk about in my channel a lot. Like, I know that not everybody who ends up leading is always like they've decided that they want to lead. Sometimes there's a gap and there's a need, and somebody needs to fill that need. So if you're, kind of pushed into that place, then okay, what do I
Here
do
it
now?
is.
You know, it's like, here it is. So that was kind of how I started leading. I was just put into that position and it was like, okay,
Mm,
I'm going to do this. And I was not perfect by any means, not as a leader, not as a person, not as a Christian. I'm
yeah.
still not, and I don't think anybody is. But at that time, there was just a lot going on. It was, it was my first time like being away from home. So it was a lot of just like, okay, like I'm a Christian and I'm part of this fellowship and we have to do this and we have to do small groups and we have to do all this stuff. And then I'm
Oh
like
yeah.
starting to ask questions too, like, okay, why am I doing all this stuff? And what does the Bible say about this? And
Mm,
what does Jesus say? And what is, and just kind of figuring it out, because
yeah.
I think that's a very important place for everyone in their faith, especially, you grow up in church, and you're given this faith and it's like such a gift and you accept Jesus when you're so young, and it's beautiful and it's amazing and there's a lot of richness and depth in that. But I was at that point just starting to ask some questions and starting to figure out, what do I think about this? So that, on top of being the only person who can lead worship, was a kind of a difficult place to be. But I learned, and I learned through struggle. I learned
Mm,
through making mistakes. I learned through doing the wrong thing. And that's kind of the point of my channel, is like to give out the stuff that I had to learn through trial and error starting at
yeah.
that point. And there was more trial and error to come, of course. But having to just being able to give that out so that other people who might find themselves in the same position don't have to go through the long road, but they can just
Yeah.
kind of take the shortcut that I'm giving. So started in college, long progression. I, through all the questioning and all of that, Jesus met me just in like a really tangible, experiential way. And I, you know, I was like, this is it. Like,
Mm,
there was no more like question for me at that point. There was no more like doubting or confusion or anything like that. I was just like, I know God is real. I know all the things. It was just, I was very sure. And
yeah.
I had experienced it for myself. And so by that point, that was like, I mean, it was a whole process all that
Hmm.
time. By my senior year, um, some friends of mine had started a house of prayer. And I don't know if you're familiar with the International House of Prayer, like IHOP, their model of harp and bowl worship.
Mm,
But friends of mine had started a house of prayer, and we were doing that. They were doing it, and I kind of started going, and had some really great experiences just attending. And I had I had been a musician at that point, and the friends of mine who started the House of Prayer weren't really like, they were singers, but it was like two people who could play the guitar and they could do like four chords. And it was like very
yeah.
bare minimum. So I had already been playing guitar for years at that point. And so like when I think about that time, I'm so aware of God's presence there, because I know that as a musician, there was nothing on the surface that would draw me to that, or that would like keep me in that place,
Mm,
or where I would feel this like emotional response of, I'm experiencing God.
yeah.
Which, I mean, that's like a total side note, but I think in church today, like we have lights and we have sounds and we have all of this experience that um and all the instruments and everything that are great, and I love excellence and I'm all about it. But so much more than all of that is the importance of our hearts and the importance of really encountering God, and not just encountering a great worship service. You know what I
Yes.
mean? So I'm in this house of prayer and really just encountering God, and then I joined them and I started playing, and that was the next phase of my experience in leading. And then that led to um, I was leading worship for a friend's wedding, when the worship pastor of the church that we were attending and that her wedding was being held in um, asked me to, like, he saw me lead worship for the wedding, and he spoke to me, I think it was like the next Sunday or something, and was like, hey, like, I saw you lead worship for that wedding, and I really think that there's something significant on your life for leading worship. So I
Mm,
would love it if you would join our worship team and just mentor, like I would mentor you, and just kind of teach you about leading worship, pastoring people in worship. And that's where it got to the next level for me
Mm.
of this isn't just about singing and playing guitar in front of people. Like this is about pastoring people. There's so much more to this and there's so much importance to this. Um, than I knew or than I had ever realized. So then having that experience really just was what shifted me. And then after that, I became the assistant worship pastor at the church, and then eventually was interim worship pastor, so overseeing the whole team for a while
Wow.
before
Yeah.
I moved out to Reading. So that's hopefully the short version
Yeah.
of my story with that.
Yeah, there were so many nuggets, and I mean gold nuggets in there
Yeah.
about, it didn't really kick off until you had a mentor, and I think that's an important thing. And that
Hmm.
pastor really helped you get to that next level. And I think a lot of times people don't have a special relationship like that with their pastor,
Hmm.
but it's important to have someone like that in your life. So you
For
need to find
sure.
somebody that can mentor you, and not to get you to a spot of popularity or to even be a worship leader, but to teach you how to be a true leader and not to look at the crowd, but to listen to his word and know what's
Hmm.
happening. And some other things that you said about understanding the excellence, but listening to the word. There's so many good things in there. And it kind of goes into my next question, dealing with mentorship. What are some of your biggest influences when it comes to leading worship? Who are some of the people that helped out there?
So, one of my biggest in-person influences was that pastor. That was Chris Morgan. And he was one of my biggest influences by far.
Hmm.
Um, just I learned so much, not even just in worship leading, but there was also an element of being well rounded. So I learned
Hmm.
how to run a soundboard. I learned how to connect a soundboard, like put it all together. I learned about lighting. I learned about stage design. I learned about so many elements of worship pastoring. So that was kind of the practical side. And, musicianship, he taught me things on the guitar. Um, so I learned all of that, but then I also learned about pastoring
Hmm.
people and pastoring people's hearts, and that heart is probably the most important thing when it comes to leading worship. That, there are people who are really amazingly talented, but sometimes the difficulty in being a leader can be saying no to that person being on stage, or saying no to them if you are considering their heart and
Hmm.
who they are as a person more than what your team can sound like.
Yeah.
So if you're thinking more like, hey, I think they could use some time off. I think whatever the case may be. But if you consider them more than you're considering how does our team sound, or they would sound really great, or we should,
Hmm.
all of those things. So I think he was probably my biggest influence. Um, excuse me. When it comes to music and musicians that everybody knows, and worship leaders in that realm, I would say two of my biggest. Number one is Stephanie Gretzinger. I think she's an
Oh yeah.
incredible worship leader, incredible songwriter. Like she is the real deal.
Hmm.
Like she is the real deal. And I just recently was watching a live stream that she did for alumni of BSSM. And it was just like, you know, just kind of back to basics, back to like, let's talk about Jesus. This
Yeah.
is like the point of everything is knowing Jesus and loving him. And that's it. Like, and there was a lot of other stuff she talked about, but it was very like, this is the core. And she's just a huge influence for me in worship, especially because of her authenticity,
Hmm.
and because of the fact that she doesn't sing like anyone else. She doesn't act like anyone else on stage. She doesn't, feel the need to like be confined to any one place, but she's wherever she goes, because she's I think part of Maverick City and like in Nashville now. So she's doing some other things. She's not just like a Bethel worship leader, quote unquote. She's like
Right.
in other places, and she's still herself, and she's
Hmm.
still loving Jesus, and she's still pouring out worship in a real way as herself. And that's been a huge inspiration to me, because that's what I want to do when
Yeah.
I worship. Is I want to sing like me, I want to play like me, I want to worship like me, you know regardless of what I think that might sound like, or if I think someone else's sound might be better. So she's been a huge inspiration to me in that realm. And second is United Pursuit. So I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they're also, I think, it out of Knoxville. I think
Mm,
that's kind of where
yeah.
they originated, but they're amazing. Like,
Mm,
I mean, I've always loved their music. Just as a worship group, it's not kind of like the typical, like, it's not really corporate worship. I don't think some of their songs are here and there,
hmm.
but um they inspire me as well with their authenticity. They inspire me as songwriters. They inspire me as musicians. Um, and I think the big thing that inspires me about them is their community aspect and how
Yeah.
they have formed this community and they're tight. And it's like um, just that importance of sticking with people, because I think
Yeah.
sometimes we can get focused on the things we want, or like, I want to be a leader here, or I want to do this, or I want to go to that place. But having your community around you and like sticking with the people around you, I think is huge,
Yeah,
very
definitely.
important.
That's
Yeah.
100%. That's really cool. So, my next question is there's my community is based off of, teenagers, and I know that's one of your kind of audiences too, the people that you'd like to talk to. And
Yeah.
my catchphrase on my channel is praise and worship team tips and tools for teens. Kind of a mouthful. Say that 5 times
Yeah.
fast. But I
I
know,
don't think I
yeah,
could.
there are lots of, I've tried, it's really hard, but there are lots of teenagers watching. And I'm sure that many of them are afraid of even getting on stage or worshiping corporately because they're afraid of the mistakes that they will make. And this is
Mhm.
one of my community's favorite thing to talk about. So, what are your favorite worship fails, and how did you get through them?
So personally, I did a video on worship fails, but I didn't talk a lot about my own personal worship fails. Um, but but I will for your show, for your viewers.
Thank
So
you.
you guys are getting a nice
These
little
are the best. These are the little nuggets.
yeah. So one time, this was when I was in my college ministry, and it was like somebody had the idea of doing, one of those things where you teach different parts of the audience a different part of the song,
Oh yeah.
so that it's like we're all singing together and it's this cool thing. So I was like, yeah, okay, we can do that. But I did not prepare at all. Like, I didn't
Oh.
think at all about how am I going to teach this part. This it just completely slipped my mind. And I'm sure, like, there were a million things going on. It's college. There's a lot else happening, studying, all of the things. But I just didn't think through it at all. So I get up there and it's like the first thing that we're supposed to do, and I can't even explain how miserably I failed.
Oh.
Like, I can't. It just was like, I tried to teach this one part. I'm like, okay, you guys get it? No, like, no, okay. Well, just hold on. Okay,
Hold
you
on.
guys, this is the part you're gonna, and just
Oh.
going through, and it was awful, and nobody
Mm.
really got it, and everybody was like not enthused. And we did it first because it was supposed to be this like rallying, like, yeah, let's all do this together kind of song, and it was just a complete
It just
fail, complete, just nosedive
yeah.
of a fail. So that was one.
Hmm.
Another one that's my favorite. So how I got through that one, sorry, I forgot to answer the second part of the
Oh, that's
question.
good.
How I got through that one is I haven't, and I still carry the embarrassment to
Oh,
this
man.
day. No, I'm kidding. I'm not still embarrassed about it. I think about it sometimes and I'm like,
Yeah.
like, I learned. I'm like,
It's one
okay,
of those good reminders.
yes, like, you definitely need to prepare,
Don't want to repeat that.
Oh yeah. And if you don't, like, what is it, the phrase, like, if you fail to plan, you
You
plan to
plan to
fail.
fail. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's something that I definitely learned, and that phrase became very real to me in that moment. So,
Everybody type
um
that in the comments. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail.
right. And so my second worship fail, this is something, I don't have a specific instance, but I feel like this is the easiest one to have happen, especially if you're a guitar player and you're leading and you're using a capo from one song to the next. So
Oh,
this has
not
happened to
taking
me
it.
a couple times, not taking your capo off, or having it on from your rehearsal and then, like, just not
Oh,
moving it, whatever
yeah.
it is. And then you start playing the song and it's just completely wrong. Like,
Yeah.
you are not in the right key by a mile. Like, you're so far off. And the way I get through that one and the way I have gotten through that one on stage, and I think this is probably the best way to deal with a worship fail, is to own it.
Hmm.
Like, I think that's maybe the best way to deal with any fail. Like, if you make a mistake, everybody makes mistakes. Like, literally everybody makes mistakes. And if you're standing there in front of 100 people, 500 people, 1,000 people, 2,000, however big, your church is, if you own your mistake, you'll be so much better off, and everybody can just laugh with you, and it just kind of like brings everyone together, because when someone sees, oh, you made a mistake and you owned that mistake, then it's like,
That's
oh, I
good.
make mistakes too. It's okay. All right. Yeah.
Relatable.
So I'm usually just like, if I do that, and I'm like I'll just be completely honest, as if I were just talking to you. Whoa, that was awful. Okay, we're gonna just start that over,
Yeah.
and everybody laughs, and it's like, because yeah, it is relatable, like you said, like everybody makes mistakes, like we can all relate to
Hmm.
that. So that's how I'd get over that one, or any other one on stage.
Yeah.
Um,
A
yeah,
backup plan, as we talk about on this channel, is blame the sound guy. So if it's
there's there's
if it's
that.
not an opportunity to relate to the audience, and just no, we're joking. Don't blame the sound guy, and don't tell them
Yeah.
I told you to blame the sound guy. All right, on to the next question though. To get on a little bit of a more serious note, so
Yeah.
what are you focusing on, especially during the pandemic? How are you working on your worship leading skills? How are you leading worship right now? I know on your YouTube channel is one of your big focus. And by the way, everyone, go check out your worship mentor on YouTube. She's linked up in the description below. Go subscribe right now.
Yes.
I mean, right now. Like, YouTube allows you to go to the link without getting out of this video. So go subscribe right now and come back. So go subscribe, and then I know that you talk a lot about like what is worship, worship mentorship, but you are kind of
Mhm.
leading worship on your YouTube channel. So can you talk about
Mhm.
that a little bit and how you're focusing on that?
Yeah. So, towards the beginning of the pandemic, I was wanting to do like a live worship project, which was essentially me doing worship songs, just doing them. Like, I'll play them, I'll sing them, and just not just singing the song like, verse, chorus, da da da, but actually worshiping through the song.
Hmm.
That was part of the plan. I started at the beginning. I've done a couple, but a few of them have like copyright strikes on them,
Oh
or
yeah.
not strikes, but it's like, copyright. So they're not shown everywhere, or,
Hmm.
some issues like that. And I intend to do more. I haven't gotten around to doing more. There's been so much happening, but um, one of the ways that I've been growing, and I think one of the most important ways, and I talk about this when I talk about practice, like when you are practicing your songs for the week or whatever it is you're doing. I think the most important way, excuse me, to do that is to worship.
Hmm.
Like, the most important way to practice worship leading is to worship. And when I say that, I mean that it's not just you playing your song from A to Z, but actually immersing yourself, actually spending time, actually worshiping God while you are practicing your
Hmm.
song, while you're worshiping, because that is where everything comes from. That's where the overflow comes from. That's where being a good musician and worship leader comes from. One is practice, but I think being an excellent worship leader comes from anointing, and it comes from
Yeah.
spending time in the presence. And I haven't explored this thought too deeply yet. I hope to in the future, and I hope to go into it, but um I really do believe that there is an overflow that comes when we're filled. And by filled, that means that we're spending time in the presence ourselves. We're spending time with God.
Yeah.
And it's not that you're spending time so that you become a better worship leader, but you are a better worship leader because you've spent time,
Yes.
you know? And it's like, it's just so important to spend that time. And I think that some people are called to lead worship, but I also think that some people can choose this, and they can choose to let their expression of worship, because we can all worship, like we can all lead worship. It doesn't have to be
Right.
the calling of our life. Some people, that's true, but we can all do it. We're all made to worship God.
Yeah.
So when we tap into the presence of God on our own with him, for him, to just be with him, it changes us like from the inside out.
Yeah.
And then when you are in front of other people, that's what flows out, is that you've already been filled and that's what's coming out.
Yes. And I think a big point that we've talked a little bit, like you said, I think both of us will talk about this more in the future, but you can't lead others where you haven't been.
Right.
And I mean, if you want to talk about pouring into your congregation, and I just want to be a blessing to them, you got to have something to pour into them. I mean, if you're not spending time in the closet, I've just used that term like the prayer closet. If you're not spending time in the closet, and then coming out to lead worship, how are you going to expect the anointing to even flow if it's not there? Now, I'm sure there's a certain level where the congregation can do a lot of that, and congregation can pray and get ready, but you've got to do your part in, releasing the anointing. You've got a responsibility, and that's such a good point that you brought up, because I think that's something we all should work on. All right, so now on kind of a more fun note, it's time for the lightning round. Now, this is the first official lightning round I've done. So here we go. Lightning round, are you ready?
Yes.
All right, Elvis or the Beatles?
All right, so I grew up in church. I was not allowed to listen to secular music growing up.
What about Elvis's gospel music?
I mean, even that. So I will say, I think when I was a kid, like I listened to Carmen. I don't know if anybody knows who Carmen is, but Carmen the Standard. Yeah, that I'll say that was my pick.
That's okay. He's basically like a fully Christian Elvis, I would say.
Right. So exactly.
That's good answer. Good answer. At least you didn't say the Beatles. Then we would have had a long conversation about.
I did go to Graceland though last summer.
Really?
Like it was closed, but I went by it and I went to see it because I was like, "It's amazing! Like we're driving through, why not?"
What a giant, right, Elvis? And him mixing secular and gospel together was something most people hadn't done yet. All right, coffee or tea?
Tea, definitely a tea drinker. Throat coat.
Yes.
Go to.
Yes. Dog or cat?
Dogs.
Yes.
Yeah.
I like all of your answers so far. All right. What is one book every worship leader should read?
Okay. This I need to do a video on this, but How to Worship a King by Zach Neese is I think the book that every worship leader should read. It goes deep into the biblical foundations of worship, not just like, how to be a good leader, but it's deep into the history. And I think that's super important, for us.
I actually got a comment from somebody just the other day about that book. I want to mention their name, but it's taking forever to load. There we go. So Peter Kuo said, I think How to Worship a King by Zach Neese is a highly recommended book for worship leaders. So I really have to get that book now that several people have recommended it. Y'all too. It's linked up in the description if you want to go check it out. All right. For the final piece of the lightning round, what is one final piece of advice that you would give to every either beginning worship leader or even experienced worship leader that's watching right now?
I'd say my one piece of advice is to keep going. When you make mistakes, when you mess up, keep going. Even like not just worship fails, but even relationally, if you're leading other people and you make a mistake in leadership, like learn from it and keep going. That I think would be like my second biggest piece of advice, because my first is like what we've already talked about. When you are spending time in worship on your own, like that is the way to practice. That is essential. Like the time that you spend on stage cannot be the only time that you spend in worship. So that would be my number one advice. And then my number two is keep going.
Yes, well, for a first lightning round, that was the best one so far. No, you answered everything perfectly. I mean, I wasn't even expecting dog. I was thinking you would be a cat person, actually.
Really? I'm actually allergic to cats.
Really? Yeah. Me too, actually. One scratched me on the face once. I don't like cats, but...
Oof, yeah. No, they love me, though. It's like, it's weird. Yeah. I feel like they can tell when people are allergic and they get really close. And I'm just
cats are weird. They used to rule the world, like in Egypt time,
Oh, yeah.
They just want to get back to that. Well, before we get
now they rule memes.
Yeah, exactly. Before we get on a rant about cats, thank you so much, Miss Glory, for coming on here today.
Yeah, thanks so much, Evan, for having me. This has been so fun.
Yes, we have to do it again. Everyone, go check out Your Worship Mentor. Again, linked in the description. Go subscribe. Go comment on her latest video and said Evan sent me. Like the video too and share it with some other people that you think would enjoy it.